Kelly.
And I'm Bridget.
And in this Better Beader episode, we are going to go over how to maintain and make your thread last longer and prevent it from fraying. So we're going to look at a variety of materials. We have some Sono thread, we've got some
1G thread,
some wildfire thread, fire line, and we're going to go over which threads, how to use them, and how to keep that fraying from happening. So the first lesson is whether or not there is a conditioner that you can use on your thread. So different threads are going to require that conditioning or the option of conditioning, which is usually just working with a beeswax. When you're working with a thread that's not thermally bonded or not conditioned, it's not really even a factor. So if you have wildfire thread, fire line thread, they already have kind of that clear coating on them because of the way they're manufactured. And we have a different whole Better Beader episode on the differences of threads. But if you do have a thread that you want to pull through, you're going to use usually a beeswax to do that.
And so what we have the beeswax here, and it has these little notches, and really all you do is gonna pull it through so that you get that beeswax on your thread. And it's really easy. You just like what I showed you, you just lay it on there, you pull it through, and you can do it more than once depending on how much you want it or what you think is best for what you need it for.
I know a lot of loomers like to wax their thread too to make it easier to pull through the actual kind of looming process because you're going back through. I'm not particularly a person that does a lot of wax. The problem with the wax when you're going into it, even if you're using it on something like Nymo or a thread that you want to hang well, yeah, it may prevent getting tangles, which is going to prevent fraying. But what happens to it is that it actually can get in that little tiny eye of your needle, you can get wax buildup. One little trick if you do get wax buildup in the eye of your needle is a little thread burner. So what you can do is taking the needle off, or the thread off the needle, which you will notice if you have a backup of thread of wax.
Yeah, you'll see it in there.
Yeah, you can go in and actually wax the end of your thread if you want to make it easier for you to thread the needle, but not wax the whole thing. But you can take your thread burner or thread zap and actually turn it on, heat it up, and touch it to the end or that eye of the needle to wax or to burn off basically any material that may be stuck inside that needle. When you do that, then quickly while it's warm, run it over a piece of cloth or actually get like a Q-tip to try to get out the extra wax that's in there. Waxing, it's an option. It's not my favorite option, but some people do swear by it. So.
If you have like a specific thread that is your go-to, like the 1G or the Hannah, and not one of the ones that's already conditioned, then a lot of people do like the waxing just to give it that extra kind of ease.
And that protection, which is going to, again, keep it from fraying. It also gives it a little bit of that protective coating if you happen to do get it wet or anything. And then also remember during this video, part of the fun of the Better Beader episodes is that we're not always the experts and we really rely on the community. So make sure to comment below which threads you do wax, which threads you don't wax, and kind of join in that conversation.
Yeah.
So one of the other ways to prevent fraying of thread is really the start of getting it off the spool. So whether or not you're using a 1G, you're using a wildfire, a fire line, one thing that you will want to have handy is a nice sharp cutting tool if you're going with the cutting option. Because obviously if you're using kind of a dull scissors, you're going to kind of get through there, get it up, and that's immediately going to create that fray. If you have a nice pair of sewing scissors or thread nippers, that's going to prevent that fraying right at the end, which is also going to make it easier for you to thread your needle.
And then another option is with the thread burner. And what that's going to do is with any of the preconditioned threads like the wildfire or the fire line, if you burn it down, you'll see that little ball there. And that's going to prevent any of the fraying from happening while you're working with it. And if you're using a thread burner to cut it off the spool, you can just go ahead with a pair of flat nose pliers and just flatten that out. And that'll make it easier to go through your needle as well. And it'll still have that bit of that leftover ball there to keep it from threading while you're using it.
And the same with the thread burner too, as you're getting ready to finish your project, when you go into any thread ends that may be hanging out, you're going to go in and burn that down. Again, that'll keep that end from fraying, which could work back through the knot that you've done and kind of create that ending. I have become really, really dependent on my thread burner, and I don't even know, Bridget and I were saying, we don't even have a pair of beading scissors over here, because you can even use it with this other thread too, going through, and it'll still burn the end of it and prevent fraying there as well. One of the biggest things that is going to affect the fraying of your thread is how you're holding it and using it, not when you start and get it off the roll, but actually as you're beading with it. One thing that's going to affect it is definitely what material you're taking the needle through. So if you're taking through something like a backing, obviously it's going to get a little bit more wear and tear because it has a texture to it. If you're taking it through beads, it should glide nicely unless you got caught up on another thread that's in there. The most important thing that you should learn is how to pull the thread through the project and how to create some tension on the thread. I have a thread here, just with this little sample piece that we grabbed. One, to show you if it starts to get frayed up, you can usually kind of see a little bit of fraying on it, and even if you take your finger over it, you can feel, like Bridget, if you see that little thread there, you can actually see the fray, which this is at the very end, so I was probably pulling through the needle. That's why it's there.
So real quick on that one, a lot of times you think the fray will only happen on the ends of your thread. It definitely happens through the middle too if you're not
careful.
Yep.
And that being said, the thermally bonded thread, all of that, it says it doesn't fray. Doesn't matter what kind of thread you have, the option for fray is always there. And when you take your needle through the project, you always want to think about the fact that the interior thread there, you're sewing above there. So I have a thread that's already going through that corner bead there on this little diamond stitch. You want to take your thread and needle and make sure that it goes towards the exterior there, that you're not getting trapped inside the thread on itself. When you pull the thread through, this is a hard concept for people, if you feel a lot of tension right there on the eye of the needle, it's going to fray. Like you are fraying your thread whether or not you realize it. From there also, once you pull your needle through, don't hold on to that needle. Pull the thread through the project. When you're pulling nice and tight, you want to get a nice tight grip. Hold and down closer to your project, not pulling the needle. I know so many people get in the habit of pulling the needle, and then what happens is, just like I showed you on that black thread, and Bridget, I'm sure all of these here, you can see that little fray right there. It may be right at the end, but if you include that in your project, that can, again, like you said, extend up from it.
So like this one, you can see it's fraying right only where the eye of the needle is. And that's from making that extra tension with your needle. So that definitely makes the fray, and then that fray can kind of spread and just makes it not as secure.
And will weaken your thread. So if you do notice any sort of fray going on, you can back bead and take a couple of the beads off, tie a knot, and go further down. Also, if you notice that that fray is happening, what's going to happen generally is you can see it there, it's going to continue. Again, it doesn't really matter what type. I mean, we could pile all kinds of threads up here. When you're pulling through an eye of the needle, it's nice and sharp and little, and you do want to make sure not to pull at that eye, because that is the number one way that thread actually gets pulled and gets frayed upon.
So another thing to think about when thinking about your thread is just your typical wear and tear of the thread.
Daily life of your jewelry, and
so
how to kind of make that longer.
If you have your beading bracelet or necklace or what have you, and if it's something that you're wearing every single day, if it's something that you're wearing in the shower, just these simple everyday things, that's going to make a difference on your thread, and definitely going to make it a little bit weaker.
It also, even if it's not a thread that typically stretches, sometimes it will stretch out just a little tiny bit because of that wear and tear, and it's losing some of that suppleness. So you may have a lot of projects that you might need to kind of redo or revamp, or actually retake your thread. If you're noticing it stretching a lot and getting weak, take your thread line before it breaks and reinforce the thread completely in it, so that way it solves that problem. Not only, you know, can the wear and tear, but age can also affect the thread. And people say, oh, what thread is going to last the longest? It's thread too. It has, even though it's great thread and it does really have a really high break and pound resistance, keep in mind it's thin, it's
Mhm.
thread. Think about your clothes, threads break, and
Yeah.
unfortunately it does in jewelry as well. But hopefully some of these tips and hints will help you to kind of extend that life of your thread. And also, if you do have a breakage, remember the Better Beader episode 2 ago will show you how to kind of repair and fix that thread as well. So, with all of these different tips, techniques, Better Beader episodes, make sure to press that little kind of button right here in the corner to subscribe to get regular updates from Bridget and I here at Potomac Beads, as well as check out the links below for some other helpful videos that may be related to this, like the differences in thread, as well as doing that repair in case you do have a thread that breaks. As with all of them too, please comment below.
Yes.
Let us know your tips, your tricks, your techniques, and how do you extend the life of your thread. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and hopefully you learned a lot in this Better Beader episode.